They had spent 20 years teaching her that she was worthless. So when the Duke of Blackthorne arrived at Ashcombe Manor to choose a bride, no one even bothered to dress Eleanor properly. Her sisters were given silk gowns. Eleanor was given a faded gray dress that had belonged to her eldest sister 3 years earlier. Her sisters were seated beside the fire where the Duke could see them. Eleanor was sent to stand behind the tea table, and when her father looked at her before the Duke entered, his expression held no affection at all. "Whatever you do," Lord Ashcombe whispered, "do not embarrass us." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "I understand, father. You always say that." His mouth twisted with disgust. "And yet somehow, you always manage to prove that you understand nothing." The words were quiet, but Eleanor had heard worse. She had heard them every day of her life. Worthless. Plain useless. A burden. The daughter no respectable man would ever want. But that afternoon, something strange was about to happen. Because the Duke of Blackthorne was not coming to Ashcombe Manor to choose the most beautiful daughter. He was not even coming for love. He had a reason for needing a wife. A reason no one inches the room knew, and by the end of the evening, he would point across that crowded drawing room, past two beautiful women, past their father's desperate smile, and choose the one person everyone had spent years trying to make invisible, Eleanor. But why? What could a powerful duke possibly want with a woman her own family considered worthless? And why, when he finally looked directly into her eyes, did the expression on his face change? The rain had been falling since dawn. By late afternoon, the grounds surrounding Ashcombe Manor had disappeared beneath a curtain of mist and water. Inside the drawing room, however, everything had been arranged perfectly. Candles burned beneath polished silver sconces. A fire roared in the marble hearth. The finest porcelain had been placed on the tea table, and Eleanor stood behind it with her hands folded neatly in front of her. She had been instructed not to speak unless spoken to. Her older sister, Arabella, sat nearest the fire in a gown of deep crimson silk. She was 24, beautiful, confident, and painfully aware of it. Beside her sat Lydia, the second daughter, wearing pale blue satin and a string of pearls that had belonged to their grandmother. Their father had spent the entire morning reminding them what was at stake. The Duke of Blackthorne was 32. He owned thousands of acres. He had returned from the war with a reputation for being ruthless, private, and nearly impossible to impress. More importantly, he was unmarried, and Ashcombe Manor was drowning in debt. If one of his daughters became Duchess of Blackthorne, the family's financial troubles would disappear. Eleanor knew this. Everyone knew this. What she didn't know was why her father had suddenly looked frightened when the Duke's carriage was announced. The front doors opened. A servant hurried into the room. "His Grace has arrived." Arabella immediately straightened. Lydia touched her hair. Lord Ashcombe smiled. Eleanor lowered her gaze toward the teacups. Then heavy footsteps sounded in the corridor. Slow, measured, unhurried. The room became completely silent. The Duke entered, and Eleanor made the mistake of looking up. For one brief second, their eyes met. The Duke stopped. Not for long, barely a heartbeat, but enough for Eleanor to notice something strange in his expression. Recognition, as if he had seen her before, as if he had been looking for her. Then the expression disappeared, and the Duke of Blackthorne calmly removed his gloves. "Lord Ashcombe," he said. His voice was deep, cold, controlled. "I believe you know why I am here." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the edge of the silver tray, because suddenly, for the first time in her life, she wondered, what if her family had never told her the truth about why she was worthless? The Duke of Blackthorne had been called many things: cold, ruthless, unforgiving. Some whispered that he had no heart at all. Others said the war had taken whatever softness had once lived inside him. Marcus Blackthorne did not care what they called him. He had learned a long time ago that people were more comfortable fearing a man than trying to understand him. At 32, he possessed everything a man could want: land, money, a title, influence, and absolutely no desire to share any of it. His estate stood 3 hours north of London, surrounded by dark forests and windswept hills. It was an enormous stone house, built more like a fortress than a home. Marcus preferred it that way. No crowded dinners. No endless callers. No women trying to charm him. No relatives asking for favors. No one close enough to discover what remained beneath the Duke's carefully constructed armor. His left shoulder still ached whenever the weather changed. A pale scar ran beneath his collar, and there were nights when he woke from dreams he never spoke about. His hand reaching instinctively for a sword that was no longer beside his bed. He had survived the war, but survival had taught him one lesson. Never depend on anyone. That was why marriage had become necessary. Not desirable, necessary. His mother had made that very clear. A duke required an heir. The Blackthorne name required a future. And so Marcus had agreed to visit Ashcombe Manor. He would choose a suitable woman, marry her, provide an heir, and return to the quiet life he had built for himself. Simple, practical, emotionless. At least, that was what he believed, until he saw Eleanor. Eleanor Ashcombe had learned to make herself small. It was not something she had been born knowing. She had learned it. Slowly, carefully, over 23 years, she had learned that speaking too loudly made her sisters angry. That laughing too freely made her father call her childish. That wearing anything beautiful made Arabella accuse her of trying to compete. So Eleanor stopped asking for beautiful things. She stopped asking for attention. She stopped expecting kindness. Her room was at the far end of the servants' corridor, because her father had given the better bedrooms to her sisters. Her wardrobe consisted mostly of dresses, altered from clothes that no longer fit Arabella and Lydia. Her jewelry amounted to a small silver locket with a broken chain. And yet there was one thing Eleanor possessed that no one inches Ashcombe Manor had ever managed to take from her. She noticed things. She noticed when the cook was overworked, when the stable boy limped, when the housekeeper quietly skipped meals to save money, when her father's hands trembled after receiving another letter from a creditor. She noticed everything. She simply never spoke about most of it, because Eleanor had discovered something important. People revealed themselves when they believed no one was watching, and Eleanor was almost always the person no one noticed. That was how she knew Arabella's smile was false, how she knew Lydia secretly hated being compared with their older sister, how she knew her father was terrified of losing the estate, and how she knew that the Duke of Blackthorne was not nearly as cold as everyone believed. Because when he entered the room that evening, Eleanor saw his eyes. Not the arrogance, not the power, not the intimidating reputation, the exhaustion. It lasted only a moment, but she saw it. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt something inside her chest tighten. The Duke looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for far too long. Eleanor understood that feeling, perhaps more than anyone knew. She lowered her eyes again. She had no intention of becoming his duchess. Men like Marcus Blackthorne did not choose women like her. They chose women like Arabella, beautiful, confident, polished. Women who belonged in ballrooms. Eleanor belonged behind curtains, at tea tables, in forgotten corners. That was what her family had taught her, and she had believed them, until the Duke looked at her a second time. This time, he did not look away. Marcus studied her quietly. The faded gray dress, the plain hairstyle, the hands folded carefully before her. Nothing about her suggested ambition. Nothing about her demanded attention. And yet he found himself unable to stop looking. Why was she standing there like a servant? Why did Lord Ashcombe never introduce her properly? And why did she look at him as though she could see past the title? Marcus narrowed his eyes. "Your name," he said. Eleanor looked up. "Eleanor, your grace." "Eleanor what?" She hesitated. "Ashcombe." Something changed in his face. It was subtle, almost invisible. But Eleanor saw it again. That strange flicker of recognition, she swallowed. "Have we met before, your grace?" Marcus said nothing. For the first time that afternoon, the Duke of Blackthorne looked genuinely unsettled, and Eleanor suddenly wondered if the stranger standing before her knew something about her past that even she had never been told. Because why else would a man who had supposedly never seen her before Look at her as though he had been searching for her all along. The room waited for Marcus Blackthorne to speak. Lord Ashcombe stood beside the fireplace, with his hands clasped behind his back, trying desperately to hide the tremor in his fingers. Arabella sat perfectly straight. Lydia had lowered her eyes into what she hoped looked like modesty. Eleanor remained behind the tea table, invisible. As always, Lord Ashcombe cleared his throat. Your Grace, perhaps you would like to speak with Arabella first. She is my eldest daughter, and naturally, I have spoken with her. Marcus's answer was so cold that Lord Ashcombe stopped. Arabella's smile remained fixed. Of course, she said softly. I hope your Grace found our conversation pleasant. It was informative. Her smile faltered. Marcus turned toward Lydia. And Miss Lydia. Lydia immediately rose. Yes, your Grace. You play the pianoforte. Since I was 5. I see. She waited. Marcus said nothing more. Lydia's cheeks slowly reddened. Then his gaze moved across the room, past the fireplace, past the 2 beautifully dressed women, past Lord Ashcombe, until it stopped on Eleanor. She felt her stomach tighten. No, surely not. Marcus took one slow step forward. Miss Ashcombe. Eleanor looked behind herself. There was no one there. He was speaking to her. Your Grace. Come here. The room seemed to lose all its air. Arabella's head snapped toward her. Lydia stared openly. Their father went pale. Eleanor did not move. Your Grace, I believe you mean Arabella. I do not. The Duke's eyes never left Eleanor. I mean, you. A silence followed. Not ordinary silence. The kind that arrives when everyone in the room has just witnessed something impossible. Eleanor slowly stepped away from the tea table. One step. Then another. She stopped several feet from him. Marcus studied her. Why are you hiding behind the tea service? Eleanor glanced toward her father. I'm not hiding. You are. His voice softened slightly. Who told you to stand there? Eleanor said nothing. Marcus looked at Lord Ashcombe. The older man shifted uncomfortably. I merely thought it appropriate that the younger girls remain in the background until… Until what? Lord Ashcombe swallowed. Until their turn. Marcus's expression hardened. There will be no turn. Arabella stood abruptly. Your Grace, Marcus turned toward her. I am afraid I have no intention of marrying you. The color drained from Arabella's face. Lydia immediately rose as well. And me? No. 2 words. 2 carefully prepared futures destroyed. Lord Ashcombe stared at the Duke, as though he had misunderstood the language. But your Grace. Marcus ignored him. His attention returned to Eleanor. She was still standing there, confused, almost frightened. Do you know why I came here? He asked her. Eleanor shook her head. To choose a wife, her heart stumbled. She looked down at her faded gray sleeves. Then, you have made a mistake. Marcus's eyebrows drew together. A mistake. Yes, she forced herself to meet his eyes. You should choose someone suitable. And you believe you are not suitable. Eleanor hesitated. I believe you deserve someone better. A strange expression crossed his face. Not anger, something closer to pain. Better, Eleanor nodded. Someone beautiful. You are beautiful. The words came so simply that Eleanor almost didn't understand them. Arabella's mouth fell open. Lydia stared at her sister. Even Lord Ashcombe looked stunned. Eleanor felt heat rise into her cheeks. No, your Grace. Marcus stepped closer. I did not ask whether you believed it. He lowered his voice. I told you. Eleanor's breath caught. But then Marcus looked toward the others. Your daughters have spent the last hour telling me what they can offer me. He glanced at Arabella. Beauty. At Lydia. Accomplishment. Then, back to Eleanor. You offered me neither. Eleanor lowered her eyes. I am sorry, don't be. His voice was unexpectedly gentle. You offered me the truth. She looked up. Marcus continued. You were the only person in this room who did not spend the afternoon trying to become someone you thought I would want. Eleanor couldn't answer, because no one had ever described her that way before. Not even once. Her father suddenly stepped forward. Your Grace, Eleanor is not prepared for a position like this. Marcus's gaze became icy. Neither was I prepared to inherit a dukedom. Lord Ashcombe fell silent. Marcus turned back to Eleanor. I have made my decision. Her pulse hammered. What decision? His eyes held hers. I will marry you. A gasp escaped Lydia. Arabella laughed once. A sharp, disbelieving sound. You cannot be serious. Marcus slowly turned his head. Do I look like a man who makes jokes about marriage? Arabella immediately went silent. Eleanor shook her head. No, no. I mean, Your Grace, you cannot marry me. Why? Because my family is right. The Duke stared at her. Eleanor's voice became smaller. I have nothing to offer you. Marcus looked at the woman who had spent her entire life believing that sentence. Then he asked quietly, Who taught you that? Eleanor's lips parted. She glanced toward her father. Marcus followed her gaze. Something dangerous entered his eyes. Lord Ashcombe shifted. Your Grace, this is a family matter. Marcus's expression did not change. Not anymore. The words landed like a blade. He stepped closer to Eleanor. You will not be sent to my estate as some discarded daughter. Her eyes widened. You will enter Blackthorne House as its mistress. He paused. And as my wife. Eleanor's heart pounded so hard she could hear it. But why me? For the first time, Marcus looked away. Only for a moment. When he looked back, the coldness had returned. There are reasons. Eleanor frowned. What reasons? I cannot tell you yet. That answer frightened her more than anything else. Then why choose me? Marcus leaned slightly closer. His voice dropped until only she could hear it. Because 5 years ago, I made a promise. Eleanor stared at him. A promise to whom? His jaw tightened. To your mother. Eleanor stopped breathing. Her mother had been dead for 7 years, and no one had ever told her that the Duke of Blackthorne had known her. Marcus straightened. Around them, the entire room remained frozen. Eleanor whispered, What did my mother ask you to do? The Duke looked toward Lord Ashcombe. His expression hardened. That is a conversation we will have after we are married. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Because suddenly, this was no longer a marriage proposal. It was a secret. And somehow, her dead mother had been keeping it for 7 years. The wedding was arranged before Eleanor had time to understand the proposal. By midnight, the servants at Ashcombe Manor had been ordered to prepare the chapel. By sunrise, the Duke's solicitor had arrived with the marriage contract. And by breakfast, Eleanor's entire life had already been decided. She stood beside the tall window in her room, staring at the rain running down the glass. Her mother's name had not left her mind. 5 years ago, I made a promise. To your mother. What promise? Why had Marcus Blackthorne known her mother? And why had no one ever told Eleanor? A soft knock sounded. Eleanor turned. Her father entered. For once, he did not look angry. He looked relieved. The contract has been signed, Lord Ashcombe said. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the edge of the curtain. Without me, your consent is hardly the point. She stared at him. My consent is the point if I am the one being married. Her father gave a bitter laugh. Do not suddenly discover principles now, Eleanor. She flinched. He walked toward the table, where her few belongings were arranged. You should be grateful. Grateful, yes. His eyes moved over her faded dress. Do you know what happens to women like you? Eleanor said nothing. They become governesses, companions, spinsters living in some aunt's spare room. He paused. You have been given the opportunity of a lifetime. Because he is a duke. Because he chose you. There was something almost insulting about the way he said it, as if the fact that Marcus had chosen her was so unbelievable that it could only be a miracle. Eleanor looked down. Why? Her father stiffened. What? Why did he choose me? For one brief moment, something flickered across Lord Ashcombe's face. Fear, Eleanor noticed. She always noticed. You know something? I know that you are marrying a duke. Father, enough. His voice cracked. You have spent 23 years being invisible. For once, accept the good fortune that has fallen into your lap and stop asking questions. He turned toward the door. Then Eleanor spoke. Did my mother know him? Her father stopped. The room went silent. Slowly, he looked back at her. Who told you that? The Duke. The color drained from his face. Eleanor took one step forward. He said he made a promise to Mother. Her father stared at her. Then he whispered, "Forget he ever said that," and walked out. Eleanor stood, frozen, because her father had never told her to forget anything before. He had always told her what to remember. This time, he was afraid of what she might discover. At 10 o'clock the next morning, Eleanor entered the village chapel. There were no flowers, no orchestra, no guests, no grand celebration. Only a handful of servants, the solicitor, the priest, her father, and the man waiting beside the altar. Marcus Blackthorne. He wore black. Of course he did. His expression was unreadable. When Eleanor reached him, he looked down at her. For the first time, she noticed that he looked almost as nervous as she felt. "You came," he murmured. Eleanor almost smiled. "You sent for me." A faint flicker touched his eyes. "I suppose I did." The priest cleared his throat. The ceremony began. The words seemed distant. Eleanor heard them, but they felt as though they belonged to someone else's life. Wife, husband, duchess, duke, forever. When the priest finally asked the question, Eleanor's throat tightened. "Do you, Eleanor Ashcombe, take Marcus Blackthorne as your lawful husband?" She looked at him. This man was a stranger, a dangerous stranger, a powerful stranger, a man who had chosen her for reasons he refused to explain. And yet, beneath all of that, she had seen something no one else seemed to notice. Loneliness, she swallowed. "I do." Marcus's eyes held hers. "And do you, Marcus Blackthorne, take Eleanor Ashcombe as your lawful wife?" A long silence followed. Then Marcus answered, "I do." His voice was quiet, but certain. The priest joined their hands. Marcus's fingers closed around hers. His hand was warm, rough, steady. Eleanor expected the touch to feel like a contract. Instead, it felt strangely reassuring. The ring slid onto her finger. A simple gold band. No diamonds, no ceremony worthy of a duchess. But when Marcus's thumb brushed briefly over her knuckle, Eleanor felt something she couldn't explain. Protection, not possession. Protection. The priest pronounced them husband and wife. And just like that, Eleanor Ashcombe ceased to exist. She was now the Duchess of Blackthorne. Outside, the rain continued falling. Marcus offered his arm. Eleanor hesitated, then placed her hand upon it. They walked down the chapel steps together. Her father remained behind. He did not congratulate her. He did not kiss her cheek. He simply watched the carriage disappear. As if he had just sold something he had been desperate to get rid of. Inside the carriage, Eleanor sat opposite her new husband. For several minutes, neither spoke. The wheels rolled over the wet road. The countryside passed beyond the glass. Finally, Marcus said, "You may ask me 3 questions." Eleanor looked up. "Only 3? For now." She studied him. "Why did you choose me?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I told you. You made a promise to my mother." "Yes." "What promise?" His gaze moved toward the window. "I cannot tell you yet," Eleanor frowned. "That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give." She was quiet. Then she asked her second question. "Do you intend to love me?" Marcus looked at her. The question seemed to catch him completely off guard. For several seconds he said nothing. Finally he replied, "I did not marry you for love." Something inside Eleanor sank. "I see. But," he continued, "I will never humiliate you." She looked back at him. "You will have your own rooms, your own servants, your own accounts. You will have complete authority over the household. And you, I will stay out of your way." Eleanor's mouth tightened. "That sounds less like a marriage and more like a business arrangement." Marcus gave a faint, humorless smile. "That is precisely what it is." She looked down at her wedding ring. Then came the third question. "Will you ever tell me the truth about my mother?" Marcus's expression changed. Not much, but enough. "Yes." When? "When it is safe." "For whom?" His eyes met hers. "For you." Eleanor felt a chill run through her. Before she could ask anything else, Marcus leaned back. You should rest. She looked out at the road. I have spent my entire life being told I am worthless. Marcus's eyes hardened. Who told you that? My father, your sisters. Yes. He was silent. Then his voice came low and controlled. Then they were wrong. Eleanor looked at him. You don't know me. No, Marcus said. His gaze remained fixed on hers. But I intend to. The carriage continued north. Neither of them spoke again. But something had changed. They were no longer strangers traveling toward an arranged marriage. They were two people carrying secrets. And somewhere beyond the darkening hills waited Blackthorne Hall, the house Eleanor had never seen, the home of the man she had just married, and the place where she would finally learn why her dead mother had trusted the Duke of Blackthorne with a secret she had taken to her grave. Blackthorne Hall was nothing like Eleanor had imagined. It was beautiful and completely lifeless. The carriage stopped beneath a stone archway just before sunset. Eleanor stepped down and looked up at the enormous house. Dark windows, tall towers, ivy crawling across ancient stone. There were servants waiting beneath the entrance, but no music, no welcoming smiles, no flowers, no celebration. It felt less like a newlywed's arrival, and more like the arrival of a prisoner. Marcus stepped out behind her. Welcome home, Your Grace. Eleanor turned toward him. Home. His expression remained unreadable. You are the Duchess of Blackthorne now. He offered his arm. She accepted it. But the moment they crossed the threshold, Marcus removed his hand. Not rudely, not cruelly, simply as though touching her had never been part of the arrangement. Eleanor noticed. Of course she did. Her new life began with rules. Breakfast was at 8, dinner was at 7. The Duke took his meals in the study whenever he wished to work. The West Wing belonged to Eleanor. The East Wing belonged to Marcus. His study was private. His correspondence was private. His past was private, and apparently so was his heart. On the first morning, Eleanor entered the breakfast room, expecting to see her husband. His chair was empty. His Grace has already eaten, the butler explained. Eleanor looked at the untouched chair. At what time? 6, Your Grace. She stared at the clock. It was barely 8. He always rises early. Yes. Does he usually eat alone? The butler hesitated. Always. Eleanor nodded. Thank you. She sat down. For the first time in her life, she had more food placed in front of her than she could possibly eat, and no one to share it with. Days passed. Then a week. Marcus was never unkind. That was almost the problem. He gave her everything she needed. A private sitting room, new dresses, a lady's maid, books, jewelry, a carriage, an allowance larger than anything Eleanor had ever imagined. But he gave her none of himself. Every evening, he disappeared into his study. Every morning, he left before she woke. When they crossed paths in the corridor, he bowed. When they ate together, he spoke about the estate. When she asked about his work, he answered politely. When she asked about his childhood, he changed the subject. And whenever Eleanor mentioned her mother, he became silent. The distance between them grew without either of them ever discussing it. One evening, Eleanor stood outside the study. A thin line of light showed beneath the door. She raised her hand, knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. Come in. Eleanor opened the door. Marcus sat behind an enormous desk covered with papers. He did not look up. Is something wrong? No. Then why are you here? The question was not cruel, but it hurt. Eleanor stepped inside. I thought we might have dinner together. I have work. You always have work. His pen stopped. For the first time, he looked at her. You knew what this marriage was. Yes. A practical arrangement. Yes. Then, what did you expect? Eleanor's lips parted. She almost said nothing. Almost. But something in her finally broke through the careful silence. I expected you to speak to me like I was your wife. Marcus stared at her. You are my wife. That is not what I meant. Silence. He slowly leaned back. What did you mean? Eleanor looked at him. I don't know. Her voice softened. I suppose I wanted to know the man I married. Something moved behind his eyes. Pain. Gone almost immediately. You don't want to know me. Eleanor frowned. Why? Because you would regret it. Is that what you think? Yes. Then perhaps you should let me decide. Marcus looked away. No. One word. Final. Eleanor felt the familiar ache she had known all her life. The feeling of being unwanted. She turned toward the door. Good night, Your Grace, Eleanor. She stopped. It was the first time he had said her name that evening. She turned back. Marcus seemed to struggle with something he could not put into words. Finally, he said, I'm sorry. She stared at him. For what? He looked at the papers before him. For making you believe this marriage means nothing. Eleanor waited, but he said nothing more. She left, and Marcus remained alone. He closed his eyes, because the truth was much worse than Eleanor could imagine. He had not been avoiding her because he felt nothing. He was avoiding her because he felt far too much. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. She walked through the west corridor in her dressing gown, unable to quiet her thoughts. As she passed the library, she noticed the door was slightly open. A faint light escaped through the gap. She stopped. Inside, Marcus stood beside the fireplace. He was holding something. A small, old envelope. Eleanor couldn't see the writing, but she recognized the handwriting. Her mother's. Her heart stopped. Marcus unfolded the letter. His face changed as he read it. Then, very quietly, he whispered, I promised you. Eleanor stood frozen outside the door. Promised her what? Why had her mother written to him? And why had the Duke of Blackthorne married her daughter 5 years after her mother's death? Eleanor stepped backward before he could see her. She returned to her room without making a sound. But for the first time since her wedding, she was no longer simply lonely. She was suspicious. Because perhaps Marcus had never chosen her because he wanted a wife. Perhaps he had chosen her because of a promise made to a woman who was no longer alive to explain it. And the question that frightened Eleanor most was this. What had her mother known about the Duke that she had never told her daughter? The first change was so small that Eleanor almost missed it. Marcus began taking tea in the breakfast room. Not every morning, not even regularly. But 3 mornings after Eleanor had discovered the letter in the library, he appeared at precisely 8 o'clock. Eleanor looked up from her book. Marcus stopped in the doorway. Am I interrupting? She shook her head. No. He walked to the chair opposite hers and sat down. The butler immediately approached. Tea, Your Grace. Marcus glanced at Eleanor. What are you having? She looked at him, surprised. Earl Grey, then the same. It was such a simple request. Yet, Eleanor found herself staring at him. Marcus noticed. What? Nothing. You're staring? I was only wondering why you changed your mind. About breakfast. About eating alone. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Perhaps I became tired of eating alone. Eleanor lowered her eyes to hide her smile. Neither mentioned that they both knew he had been avoiding her. For the first time, breakfast did not feel like a duty. It felt almost normal. A week later, Eleanor discovered another strange habit. Marcus disliked roses. She found this out when the head gardener proudly showed her the new arrangements being prepared for the drawing room. His Grace doesn't like them, the gardener said. Eleanor frowned. Why? I don't know, Your Grace. He never explained. That evening, Eleanor removed every rose from the drawing room. She replaced them with simple white flowers from the kitchen garden. Marcus noticed immediately. He stopped beside the mantelpiece. You changed the flowers? Yes. Why? I was told you dislike roses. He looked at her. Who told you? The gardener. Marcus was quiet. Then he said, I don't dislike roses. Eleanor tilted her head. You don't? No. Then why did you tell the gardener that? Marcus looked toward the flowers. Because my mother loved them. Eleanor's expression softened. She understood immediately. He had not hated the flowers. He had hated what they reminded him of. She didn't ask another question. Instead, she simply said, I'll put the roses back tomorrow. Marcus looked at her. You don't have to. I know. She smiled faintly. I just thought perhaps you might want one good memory among the difficult ones. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then Marcus reached toward the vase. His fingers brushed hers. Neither moved. It lasted only a second, but neither forgot it. The next morning, Eleanor found a single white rose on her desk. There was no note. She didn't need one. She smiled. Their conversations changed after that. Not dramatically. A question here. A remark there. Marcus began asking about the books Eleanor read. Eleanor discovered he hated crowded rooms. He discovered she liked thunderstorms. She learned that he could play the piano. He learned that she could not dance. One afternoon, he found her struggling with a difficult accounting ledger. You've been staring at that page for 10 minutes. Eleanor looked up. I know. Do you understand it? No. Marcus pulled out the chair beside her. Move. She blinked. What? Move over. He sat beside her. For the next half hour, he explained the estate accounts. Not as a duke instructing his duchess, but as a man helping someone he respected. Eleanor listened carefully. You make it sound simple. It is simple. You've spent your entire life doing this. So have you. She frowned. What do you mean? Marcus looked at the ledger. You notice things. Eleanor smiled faintly. Is that a compliment? Yes. I'll remember the date. His mouth twitched. Don't become unbearable. She laughed. It was the first time Marcus had heard her laugh freely. He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. Eleanor noticed. The moment passed, but something had shifted again. One evening, Eleanor caught a cold. It was nothing serious. A little fever. A sore throat. She expected her maid to attend to her. Instead, she woke in the middle of the night and found Marcus sitting beside the fireplace. He was reading, Your Grace. He looked up immediately. How do you feel? Better. You have a fever. Only a little. You should be sleeping. So should you. Marcus closed his book. I wasn't tired. Eleanor looked at him suspiciously. You stayed? Yes. Why? He hesitated. Then answered simply, because you were ill. Her heart gave a strange little flutter. You didn't have to. I know. The words echoed her own from the day before. She smiled. Marcus noticed. What? Nothing. You keep saying that. And you keep asking. A quiet laugh escaped him. Eleanor stared. She had never heard him laugh before, not properly. It changed his entire face. For one brief moment, the feared Duke of Blackthorne disappeared. There was only Marcus, a tired man sitting beside his wife's bed because he was worried about her. Eleanor's voice softened. You should do that more often. Do what? Laugh. He looked at her. I don't laugh often. I noticed. Is that another criticism? No. She smiled. I think it's a compliment. Marcus looked down. But Eleanor saw the faint smile remain. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find a small tray beside her bed. Tea, toast, honey, and one white rose. She picked up the rose. Her fingers trembled slightly. She had spent her entire life believing affection had to be earned. By being useful, by being quiet, by never asking for anything. But Marcus seemed to be teaching her something different. Sometimes affection appeared without being requested. Sometimes someone noticed when you were cold. Sometimes someone remembered how you took your tea. And sometimes someone stayed awake through the night simply because they did not want you to be alone. Weeks passed. Their marriage was still strange. They still had separate rooms. Marcus still disappeared into his study. Eleanor still had questions about her mother, and the letter remained a secret between them. But the silence between husband and wife had changed. It was no longer empty. It was comfortable. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor sat near the library window reading. Marcus entered. He stopped when he saw her. You're in my chair. She looked up. I didn't know it was yours. It is. Then I suppose you'll have to find another. Marcus stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Very well. He pulled another chair beside hers. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You could have chosen any chair. I know. Then why this one? Marcus opened his book. Because it's raining. She looked toward the window. Yes, and I prefer listening to rain with someone. Eleanor became very still. Marcus did not look at her, but beneath the table, his hand rested only inches from hers. Neither moved. Neither spoke. And for the first time since their wedding, Eleanor wondered if the distance between them was finally beginning to disappear. But there was one thing she still didn't know. Marcus had not forgotten the promise he made to her mother. In fact, every time he looked at Eleanor, that promise became harder to keep, because the longer he knew her, the less he wanted their marriage to remain a secret, built on the past. He wanted something else, something he had never expected to want again. A future. The first sign that Eleanor was more capable than anyone had believed came from a mistake. Not hers. The estate's. It happened on a Monday morning. Eleanor was sitting in the small office overlooking the eastern gardens when the steward placed a stack of papers in front of her. His Grace asked me to bring these to you. Eleanor frowned. Why? The steward hesitated. He said you had been asking questions about the estate accounts. I was only curious. He said you should look at them. Eleanor glanced down. Rent collections, grain purchases, servant wages, horse feed, repairs, taxes. At first, it all looked ordinary. Then she noticed the numbers. She turned one page, then another. Something was wrong. Mr. Bennet. Yes, Your Grace. When was this contract signed? The grain contract. Yes, last autumn. Eleanor looked at the figures again. And the price? 42 shillings per quarter. She frowned. That is too high. The steward blinked. Your Grace, the market price last autumn was 31. He stared at her. Eleanor pointed toward the page. Someone has been charging the estate 11 shillings more than the market rate. The steward's face changed. That cannot be. Why not? Because the supplier has dealt with Blackthorne Hall for 12 years. That doesn't mean he hasn't changed his prices. Eleanor reached for another document. And this. She placed it beside the first. The quantity delivered is different from the quantity recorded. The steward leaned closer. She continued. Your ledger says 200 sacks. Yes, but the warehouse record says 160. Silence. Eleanor looked up. Where are the other 40? The steward had no answer. She slowly closed the ledger. How long has this been happening? We'll need to check. No. Eleanor pushed the papers toward him. Check the last 3 years. The steward stared at her. Your Grace, that could take weeks. Then begin today. He hesitated. You believe someone is stealing from the estate. I believe someone is being paid for goods that never arrive. That is the same thing. No. Eleanor looked toward the window. It is worse. The steward frowned. Why? Because if someone is stealing, they are taking from the Duke. She tapped the ledger. But if someone has been falsifying records for years, they may have convinced the Duke that his estate is failing when it isn't. The steward went completely still. Eleanor looked back at him. How much debt does His Grace believe the estate has? Nearly £12,000. And how much of that is genuine? He stared at her. I don't know. Then neither does the Duke. Marcus found Eleanor 2 hours later in the same office. There were papers everywhere, ledgers, invoices, receipts, letters. The Duchess was sitting at his desk with a pencil in her hand, her hair slightly loose from hours of work. Marcus stopped in the doorway. What are you doing? Eleanor looked up. Saving you money. He stared at her. From what? Your own accounts. For several seconds, Marcus said nothing. Then he walked toward the desk. You've been looking through my private financial records. You told me I had authority over the household. I did. I assumed that included understanding what the household was spending. Marcus glanced at the papers. You found something. Eleanor nodded. Several things. She handed him a ledger. The grain supplier is overcharging you. Marcus looked at the numbers. How much? Nearly £2,000 over 3 years. His expression hardened. She handed him another document. Then there is the stable account. Another. The timber contract. Another. The repairs to the east wing. Marcus's eyes narrowed. All of these were approved by my steward. Yes. Do you think he's corrupt? I think someone is. That is a serious accusation. I know. Marcus looked at her. You're not afraid of making it. Eleanor met his eyes. I spent 23 years being afraid of making people angry. She placed the pencil down. I've decided I'm tired of it. Marcus stared at her. For the first time since their marriage, he looked at her not as the quiet woman who drank tea beside him, but as someone he had underestimated. How did you find this? Eleanor gave a small shrug. I read the numbers. That simple. No, she turned the ledger toward him. The numbers contradicted each other. Marcus leaned closer, she explained. The missing grain, the inflated prices, the duplicated repair charges, the unusual payments made to a company that had no visible office. She remembered names, dates, amounts, patterns. Marcus listened. He did not interrupt once. When she finished, he looked at the papers again. Then at her. Who taught you accounting? No one. Then how do you know this? My father used to complain about money constantly. Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. I listened. Marcus almost smiled. Of course you did. She frowned. What? You've been listening to everyone your entire life. Eleanor looked away. Someone had to. Marcus reached across the desk and picked up another document. This company. Yes. Do you know who owns it? No, I do. He looked at her. Who? Marcus's face became cold. My cousin. Eleanor froze. The man who manages your northern properties? Yes. She swallowed. Then, this is bigger than I thought. Marcus nodded. And more dangerous. The room suddenly felt colder. Eleanor looked at the papers. Then you shouldn't confront him yet. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Why? Because, if he knows we discovered this, he'll destroy the evidence. He studied her. What would you do? Eleanor looked toward the window. I'd let him believe we know nothing. Marcus's eyes narrowed. And then? We follow the money. A long silence followed. Then Marcus smiled. Not the faint smile Eleanor had occasionally seen. A real one. Slow. Proud. Almost impressed. You've been hiding this from me. Eleanor looked confused. Hiding what? How intelligent you are. She gave a small laugh. No one ever asked. Marcus stepped closer. He placed both hands on the desk. Then I am asking now. Eleanor looked up. Ask what? What else can you do? She thought for a moment. I can read French. Marcus blinked. What? And Latin. He stared. You speak French? A little. And Latin? Enough. Anything else? Eleanor smiled. I can sew. I knew that. I can ride. Marcus's eyebrows rose. I was not aware. My father didn't approve. Why? He said riding was unnecessary for a woman. Marcus shook his head. Your father appears to have been wrong about many things. Eleanor smiled. Then Marcus noticed something. She was no longer looking at the floor. She was looking directly at him. Confidently, without fear, he realized he liked it. Very much. You should have been running an estate years ago, he said. Eleanor's smile disappeared. My family would never have allowed it. I am not your family. Her eyes softened. No. Marcus reached for the ledger. And I am beginning to think that may be the greatest advantage either of us has. That evening, Marcus did something Eleanor had never expected. He invited her to dinner, not because tradition required it, not because the servants were watching, because he wanted her there. The table was smaller than usual. 2 plates, 2 glasses, 1 candle between them. Eleanor sat across from him. Marcus poured her wine. She watched him. You're staring again. I was wondering something. What do you regret choosing me? Marcus paused. Then he shook his head. No, not even after today. Especially after today. Eleanor smiled. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. You know what the strange thing is? What? When I first saw you, I thought you were the quietest person in the room. And now? His gaze softened. Now, I think, you may be the most dangerous. Eleanor laughed. Marcus smiled. and neither of them noticed that the distance between their chairs had somehow become much smaller than it had been the week before. But while they sat there, enjoying the first truly peaceful dinner of their marriage, someone was watching from the darkness beyond the eastern gardens. Someone who knew exactly what Eleanor had discovered, and someone who was terrified that the Duchess of Blackthorne had just found the one secret that could destroy him. The investigation changed something between them. Neither Marcus nor Eleanor spoke about it, but both of them felt it. Before, Marcus had seen Eleanor as the woman he had married because of a promise made to her mother. Now he saw her as something else, an equal, someone whose judgment he trusted, someone whose opinion could change his decisions, and that realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. For the next several days, they worked together. Every morning, Eleanor sat beside Marcus in his study. She read invoices. He reviewed contracts. Sometimes they argued. Often they disagreed. And surprisingly, Marcus enjoyed it. "You're wrong," Eleanor said one afternoon. Marcus looked up from the document. "I am the Duke of Blackthorne." "That does not make you correct." His eyebrows rose. "You're becoming bold. You're becoming stubborn." "I have always been stubborn." "I noticed." Marcus stared at her. Eleanor tried not to smile. "You find this amusing?" "A little." He leaned back in his chair. "You know, most people are frightened to disagree with me. Most people don't have to read your terrible handwriting." He looked at the page. "My handwriting is perfectly clear." Eleanor turned the paper toward him. "You wrote 300 or 3,000. 300. It looks like 3,000. Then perhaps you need better eyes." Eleanor laughed. Marcus went quiet. He watched her, the way her eyes brightened when she laughed, the slight movement of her hair near her cheek, the warmth that appeared in her expression whenever she forgot she was supposed to be careful around him. He realized he had been staring. Eleanor noticed. "What?" Marcus looked away. "Nothing," she smiled. "Now you're saying it." He almost laughed. Perhaps she was becoming a bad influence on him. Or perhaps she was simply bringing back a part of him that had been silent for too long. The attraction began with things so insignificant, neither of them could name it. Marcus began noticing the sound of Eleanor's footsteps in the corridor. He knew when she was coming before she entered the room. He knew the books she preferred. He knew she disliked overly sweet desserts. He knew she always forgot to wear gloves when she went into the gardens. And he began leaving them beside the door. Eleanor noticed. She also noticed that Marcus had started removing his gloves whenever he spoke to her. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it meant nothing at all. But she noticed. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on her when she entered a room, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, the way he stood slightly closer than necessary, and she noticed something else. Marcus no longer seemed uncomfortable when she touched him. One evening, they were walking through the library when Eleanor noticed a loose thread on his sleeve. "Wait." Marcus stopped. She reached for his arm. "Your sleeve." He looked down at her fingers. Eleanor carefully pulled the thread loose. Neither spoke. She became suddenly aware of how close they were. Very close. Close enough to feel his warmth. Close enough to notice the faint scent of cedar and rain on his coat. Her fingers remained against his sleeve for 1 second, too long. She withdrew them. There, Marcus did not move. "Thank you." His voice was lower than usual. Eleanor looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them seemed to remember what they had been discussing. Then Marcus stepped back. "You should get some sleep." Eleanor smiled faintly. "So should you." He nodded, but neither moved. Finally, Eleanor walked away. Marcus watched her disappear down the corridor. Then, he looked at the sleeve she had touched and quietly cursed himself, because he was beginning to want something he had promised himself he would never want again. Her, not as his duchess, not as the answer to his mother's promise, not as the woman who could save his estate. He wanted Eleanor, simply Eleanor. The following Sunday, they attended church together. It was the first time Eleanor had appeared publicly beside him as Duchess of Blackthorne. The moment they entered, whispers began. Some people looked at her dress. Others looked at her face. A few whispered about her family. Eleanor kept her expression calm. Marcus noticed. He leaned slightly toward her. Are you all right? Yes. Don't lie. She glanced at him. I am fine. He studied her. You don't have to prove anything to them. Eleanor looked ahead. I know, do you? She smiled. I am learning. His expression softened. Then he offered his arm. Eleanor looked down at it. You don't have to. I know. She placed her hand on his arm. Together, they walked forward. And the whispers became louder. Not because Eleanor was beautiful. Not because she had suddenly changed. Because the most powerful man in the room had chosen to stand beside her, publicly, without hesitation. After church, a young lord approached them. Lord Adrian Vale, he bowed. Your Grace. Marcus nodded. My lord. Adrian's eyes moved toward Eleanor. Your Duchess is quite remarkable. Eleanor smiled politely. Thank you. Adrian continued. I heard she managed the estate accounts herself. Marcus's expression changed almost imperceptibly. She did. And found irregularities your own steward missed. Yes. Adrian smiled. Impressive. Eleanor lowered her eyes. But Marcus noticed. She still struggled to accept praise. He stepped slightly closer. She is more than impressive. Eleanor looked up. Marcus met her eyes. She is the most capable person in this household. The words were simple, but Eleanor felt them deeply, because her entire life, she had been told the opposite. Worthless, useless, a burden. Now the man who commanded hundreds of people was telling the world that she was capable, and he meant it. That evening, Eleanor stood before the mirror in her bedroom. She was wearing a simple, dark green gown. Nothing extravagant. Her hair was pinned loosely at the back. A knock came. She turned. Marcus stood in the doorway. He stopped when he saw her. For several seconds, he said nothing. Eleanor smiled nervously. Is something wrong? No. You're staring. I know. She raised an eyebrow. That is becoming a habit. Marcus stepped inside. You look beautiful. Eleanor froze. The words were different from the ones he had spoken at Ashcombe Manor. Those had sounded like reassurance. This sounded like truth. She looked away. Thank you. Marcus came closer. You don't believe me. I am not accustomed to compliments. I am not accustomed to giving them. She looked up. Their eyes met. Neither moved. Marcus reached toward her, slowly, carefully. He brushed one loose strand of hair away from her face. Eleanor's breath caught. His fingers lingered near her cheek. For one suspended moment, the entire world seemed silent. Then, Marcus withdrew his hand. I should let you rest. He turned. Eleanor watched him reach the door. Marcus, he stopped. She had never called him by his first name before. He slowly turned back. Thank you? For what? For choosing me. His expression softened. I think. He paused. I am beginning to realize that I was the lucky one. Then he left. Eleanor remained standing beside the mirror. Her heart was beating far too quickly, and somewhere down the corridor, Marcus leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. Because the truth he had been trying to avoid was becoming impossible to deny. He had married Eleanor because of a promise. He had respected her because of her strength. But now, he was falling in love with her. And the one thing Marcus feared most was not loving her. It was what would happen when Eleanor finally discovered the truth about the promise her mother had made him swear. The first warning came just before dawn. A horse came racing through the gates of Blackthorne Hall. The rider barely managed to dismount before collapsing against the stable wall. Your Grace. The shout echoed across the courtyard. Marcus was already awake. He stepped onto the terrace as the stable master hurried toward him. What happened? The man's face was pale. It's the northern estate. Marcus's expression hardened. What about it? There has been a fire. For 1 second, Marcus did not move. Then, Eleanor appeared behind him. What happened? Marcus turned. His face had changed completely. The northern granary is burning. How bad? We don't know. The rider pushed himself upright. More than the granary, your grace. The workers' cottages are near it. Eleanor's heart tightened. How many families? 23. Marcus immediately turned toward the stable. Prepare the horses. Eleanor followed. I'm coming. No. She stopped. Marcus, no. His voice was firm. You are staying here. The northern estate is where the fraudulent accounts originated. His eyes narrowed. That is precisely why you're staying here. Someone may be trying to destroy the evidence. I know. Then I need to see what they are doing. Marcus stepped closer. And if whoever started that fire is waiting for you. Eleanor held his gaze. Then I would rather know than sit here wondering. Marcus's jaw tightened. For a moment, the Duke and Duchess stared at one another. Then he turned to the stable master. Prepare another horse. Eleanor's eyes widened. You said no. I changed my mind. Why? Marcus looked at her. Because I know you will follow me anyway. Despite the danger, Eleanor almost smiled. You know me too well. His expression softened. I'm beginning to. They rode north through a sky turning black with smoke. The closer they came, the worse it became. Men were running across the fields. Women carried children from the cottages. Horses screamed inside the burning stable. And above everything rose a column of smoke, thick enough to hide the morning sun. Eleanor dismounted before Marcus could help her. Where is the steward? A servant pointed toward the granary. He went inside. Eleanor looked at Marcus. Why? To save the records. Marcus cursed. The records? The account books. Your grace. Eleanor's face changed. The evidence. Marcus immediately understood. Find him. Men rushed toward the burning building. But before they reached the door, part of the roof collapsed. Everyone stumbled backward. Eleanor covered her mouth. Marcus grabbed her arm. Stay here, Marcus. Eleanor. His voice left no room for argument. He turned toward the fire, then stopped. A little girl stood near the burning stable, alone. Now, crying. Eleanor saw her first. Marcus. He turned. The child was frozen beside the fence. Flames were spreading toward the wooden structure behind her. Marcus ran. Your grace. Eleanor followed. She knew she had been told to stay back. But she also knew what would happen if the flames reached the stable. Marcus reached the girl first. He pulled her into his arms. A beam crashed behind him. Eleanor screamed. Marcus! He turned. The only path back was blocked. Smoke swallowed the entrance. For one terrible second, Eleanor could not see him. Then she remembered the estate map. The northern stable had an old service passage. She turned toward the steward. Where is the old drainage tunnel? The man stared at her. What? The tunnel beneath the stable. You can't enter that. Where is it? He pointed toward a stone wall. Eleanor ran. She found the old iron door beneath the ivy. It was locked. She searched for the key. Nothing. Then she noticed the broken hinge. She grabbed a fallen iron bar and struck. Once, twice, 3 times. The lock broke. Eleanor crawled into the dark passage. Smoke filled her lungs. She covered her mouth with her sleeve and moved forward. Marcus. No answer. She kept going. Marcus. Then she heard him. Eleanor. Relief nearly brought her to her knees. I'm here. Stay where you are. Absolutely not. A faint laugh came through the smoke. Even now. Even here. He was still Marcus. Eleanor followed his voice. She found him near the rear wall, holding the little girl against his chest. His coat was burned. Blood ran from a cut above his eyebrow, but he was standing. Can you walk? Yes. Then follow me. He looked at her. You shouldn't be here. You're welcome. His eyes narrowed. You are impossible. So I've been told. For 1 second, despite the flames around them, they smiled at each other. Then the ceiling groaned. Marcus's expression changed. Run. They moved. Eleanor reached the passage first. Marcus followed with the child. A massive beam crashed behind them. The tunnel shook. Eleanor stumbled. Marcus grabbed her waist. She fell against his chest. For a heartbeat, neither moved. His arms tightened around her. Are you hurt? No. Are you certain? Yes. He looked at her face. Smoke streaked her cheek. Her hair had come loose. She was trembling. Marcus lifted one hand and wiped the soot from her face. You frighten me. Eleanor stared at him. You frighten me too. His eyes held hers. The world seemed to disappear around them. Then the little girl coughed. They both looked down. Marcus stepped back. We need to get her out. Once they reached safety, Eleanor immediately noticed something. The fire had not begun in the kitchen. It had not started in the stable. It had started inside the records room. Someone had deliberately set it, and the door had been locked from the outside. Marcus stood beside the ruins, staring at the ashes. What were they trying to destroy? Eleanor crouched beside the remains. Not everything. She pulled something from beneath a charred beam. A metal box. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What is that? Eleanor opened it. Inside were several partially burned documents. She read the first page. Then the second. Her face went pale. Marcus noticed immediately. What? She handed him the document. He read it. His expression became terrifyingly still. What is it? Eleanor swallowed. The grain contracts. Marcus looked at the papers. The originals. Yes, he turned another page. There were signatures, payments, names, dates. And beneath them all was one name Eleanor had never expected to see. Her father's. Marcus looked at her. Your father. Eleanor shook her head. No, there is his signature. I know. Her voice trembled. But he didn't do this. How can you be certain? Because he was terrified when you chose me. Marcus stared at her. Eleanor continued. He wasn't afraid of losing money. She looked toward the burning estate. He was afraid I would discover something. Marcus's face hardened. Then we need to know what. A rider suddenly came galloping across the field. Your Grace. Marcus turned. What now? The rider stopped before them, struggling to breathe. There has been another attack. Where? Ashcombe Manor. Eleanor went completely still. Her childhood home. What happened? The rider looked at her. The manor has been searched. Marcus's eyes narrowed. By whom? We don't know. And Lord Ashcombe? The rider hesitated. He's gone. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Gone where? No one knows. Marcus looked at the burned documents in his hand. Then at Eleanor. The pieces were beginning to fit together. The stolen money, the false accounts, the secret payments, her mother's letter, the fire. And now her father's disappearance. Someone was not merely trying to hide a crime. Someone was trying to erase the past. Marcus stepped toward Eleanor. We're going back. She nodded, but before they could mount their horses, Marcus caught her hand. Eleanor looked at him. His expression was different now. Not the controlled Duke, not the distant husband. A man who had just realized that the woman he loved was in danger. Stay beside me. Eleanor squeezed his hand. I will. Marcus looked into her eyes. No matter what we find, no matter what. He nodded. Then they rode toward Ashcombe Manor. Neither of them knew that inside Eleanor's childhood home, someone had left a single letter on her mother's old desk. And on the outside, written in a trembling hand, were 4 words. He should have told you. The road to Ashcombe Manor was silent, too silent. Marcus rode ahead, his eyes constantly moving across the trees. Eleanor followed close behind. Neither spoke about the letter. Neither spoke about her father. But both knew something had changed. This was no longer about money. Someone had deliberately attacked Ashcombe Manor after setting fire to the northern estate. And now Eleanor was the person standing between that someone and the truth. Marcus looked over his shoulder. Stay close. I am close. Closer. Eleanor urged her horse forward. Are you expecting an army? No. Then why are you watching every tree? Because whoever did this knows we are coming. Eleanor's stomach tightened. You think they're still there? I think they may be. She studied his face. You're afraid. Marcus's eyes remained on the road. I am cautious. That wasn't what I said. He looked at her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, Marcus said quietly, I'm afraid of losing you. Eleanor's breath caught. It was the first time he had ever admitted fear. Before she could answer, Marcus suddenly raised his hand. Stop, both horses halted. He listened. Nothing. Then, a branch snapped somewhere in the woods. Marcus immediately dismounted. Stay on the horse. Eleanor frowned. What did you hear? Simona. He drew his pistol. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Marcus. Behind me, I can help. Not this time. His voice was firm. He moved into the trees. Eleanor watched him disappear. 5 seconds, 10, 20, nothing. She could hear her own heartbeat. Then, a gunshot shattered the silence. Eleanor gasped, Marcus. She jumped from her horse. He appeared between the trees, one hand pressed against his shoulder. Blood spread across his coat. Eleanor ran toward him. You're hurt. It's a graze. You've been shot. I said, it's a graze. She grabbed his arm. Let me see. Marcus looked at her. Then at the blood. Eleanor, don't argue with me. Something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes. You're becoming very commanding. You married me? I remember. Then stop behaving as if I am made of glass. Marcus's expression softened. He allowed her to pull his coat aside. The bullet had only torn the flesh near his shoulder, but the wound was bleeding badly. Eleanor tore a strip from the inside of her sleeve. Marcus watched her wrap it around his arm. You ruined your dress. I don't care. You should. I don't. She tightened the bandage. Marcus winced. Sorry. You don't sound sorry. I am. No, you're not. I am when you're bleeding. He looked at her. The words seemed to stop him. You were frightened. Eleanor's hand slowed. Yes. Why? She looked up. Because I thought you were dead. Marcus went completely still. Eleanor's voice trembled. When I heard that gunshot, I thought. She couldn't finish. Marcus reached for her hand. Eleanor. She looked at him. I am not going anywhere. You don't know that. No, he gently squeezed her fingers. But I intend to stay. Her eyes filled with tears. Marcus noticed. He raised his free hand and touched her cheek. Don't cry. I am not crying. You are. She laughed weakly. So are you. Marcus froze. Eleanor looked closely. There was moisture in his eyes. A single tear had escaped before he could hide it. She whispered, Marcus. He turned his face away. I don't do this. Do what? Need someone. Eleanor stepped closer. You don't have to need me. His jaw tightened, but I do. The admission was barely audible. Eleanor's heart broke for him. She placed her hand against his chest. You can. Marcus looked down at her hand. Then at her face. I lost people before. His voice had become rough. Friends. Men I trusted. Men who followed me into places they should never have survived. He swallowed. I learned not to care too deeply. Eleanor listened. But then you came into my life. His eyes met hers. And suddenly every door I closed started opening again. Eleanor's voice softened. You don't have to be strong every moment. Marcus gave a bitter smile. I am the Duke of Blackthorne. You are also a man. He looked at her. A very stubborn man. She smiled through her tears. That too. For the first time, Marcus allowed himself to lean toward her. His forehead rested gently against hers. No kiss. No grand declaration. Just two wounded people standing beneath the trees. Holding each other together, they reached Ashcombe Manor just before sunset. The gate stood open. Too open. Marcus immediately raised his hand. Wait. Eleanor looked ahead. What? The guards. There were none. The courtyard was empty. The front door stood wide open. Marcus dismounted. Stay behind me. This time, Eleanor did not argue. They entered the house. Everything was overturned. Drawers had been emptied. Paintings had been removed from the walls. Furniture had been searched, but there was something strange. The intruders had ignored the silver, ignored the jewelry, ignored the expensive paintings. They had searched only one place. The old family rooms. Eleanor walked toward her mother's bedroom. Marcus caught her wrist. Don't. She looked at him. This is where she lived. And whoever searched this house may have been looking for the same thing you are. Eleanor nodded. Then we need to find it first, Marcus released her. Together, they entered. The room smelled of dust and old roses. Eleanor walked slowly toward the desk. Her mother's desk. She ran her fingers across the wood, then stopped. There was a hidden compartment. Marcus noticed. You know how to open it. Eleanor shook her head. She examined the drawer. Mother showed me this once. When I was 13. What did she say? Eleanor closed her eyes. She said. Her voice trembled. If the Duke ever comes looking for this, trust him. Marcus went pale. Eleanor opened her eyes. You knew. Marcus said nothing. You knew she left something here. I suspected. Why didn't you tell me? His silence answered her. Eleanor stepped back. You promised me the truth. I know. You promised. I know? Her voice broke. Then why? Marcus looked at her. Because for the first time, Eleanor saw something she had never seen in him before. Fear. Not fear of an enemy. Not fear of death. Fear of losing her. I was trying to protect you. From what? From me. She stared at him. Marcus looked toward the hidden compartment. Your mother knew what kind of man I was. What kind? His eyes darkened. The kind who destroys anyone who threatens the people he loves. Eleanor's breath caught. He stepped closer. And now you are one of those people. He reached for her hand. I should have told you everything. Yes, I was afraid. Eleanor squeezed his fingers. You don't have to be anymore. Marcus looked at her. Why? Because whatever is inside that compartment. She stepped closer. We will face it together. For several seconds, Marcus simply stared at her. Then he pulled her gently into his arms. Eleanor rested her head against his chest. His heartbeat was fast. So was hers. And neither of them noticed the hidden compartment, slowly opening beneath the old desk. Inside was a bundle of letters, a family seal, and a faded portrait. Marcus looked down. Eleanor followed his gaze. The portrait showed her mother standing beside a younger Marcus. But they were not alone. Between them stood a boy Eleanor had never seen before. And written on the back of the portrait were 6 words. The truth about your brother begins here. The portrait remained between them. Eleanor could barely breathe. Her mother's face stared back at her from another lifetime. Beside her stood a much younger Marcus, and between them, a little boy. Eleanor touched the faded photograph with trembling fingers. Who is he? Marcus did not answer. Marcus, he looked away. Eleanor stepped closer. You promised me the truth. I know. Then tell me. His jaw tightened. For several seconds, he simply stared at the portrait. Then he whispered. His name was Thomas. Marcus closed his eyes. My younger brother. Eleanor froze. Your brother? Yes. What happened to him? Marcus looked at her. He died. The room became silent. When, 5 years before I met you. Eleanor looked at the portrait again. But my mother knew him. She did. How? Marcus swallowed. She helped hide him. Eleanor's eyes widened. Hide him from whom? From my father. She stared at him. Marcus continued. My father believed Thomas was weak. He wanted me to become the perfect heir. But Thomas refused to become cruel just because he was born into a powerful family. His voice became quieter. So my mother sent him away. And my mother helped. Yes. Why? Because your mother was her closest friend. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. And the promise. Marcus looked at her. Your mother asked me to protect you. From what? From my father. Eleanor shook her head. He died years ago. He did. Then why am I still in danger? Marcus looked toward the doorway. Because my father's secrets didn't die with him. A chill ran through her. What secrets? Marcus took a breath. Your father was involved. Eleanor stepped backward. No. He helped my father move money through the Ashcombe estate. My father? Yes. Then why did you marry me? Marcus's expression broke. Because I thought marrying you would keep you under my protection. Eleanor's voice trembled. And now? He stepped closer. Now I know that isn't the reason I stayed. She looked at him. What do you mean? Marcus stopped directly in front of her. His eyes held hers. When I first chose you, it was because of your mother. Eleanor's heart sank. But then, you began challenging me. A faint smile appeared. You argued with me. She almost laughed through her tears. You were wrong. I know. He stepped closer. You made me laugh. Eleanor lowered her eyes. You made me angry. I know that too. You made this house feel like a home. Her eyes lifted again. Marcus's voice became almost a whisper, and somewhere between all those arguments and quiet mornings. He paused. I stopped protecting you because I had promised your mother. Eleanor's breath caught. I started protecting you because I love you. She stared at him. The words seemed impossible. Marcus Blackthorne, the feared Duke, the man who had built walls around every emotion, was standing in front of her and finally telling her the truth. I love you, Eleanor. Her lips trembled. You do? Yes. How long? He gave a quiet, almost embarrassed laugh. I don't know. He looked at her. Perhaps the day you told me my handwriting was terrible. Eleanor laughed through her tears. Perhaps the day you found the missing money. He shook his head. Perhaps the day you stayed beside me when I was wounded. His expression softened. But I know when I realized it, the night you were ill. Eleanor stared at him. You stayed awake. I couldn't sleep. Why? Because I was terrified something would happen to you. He reached for her hand. I realized then that losing you would hurt more than losing anything I had ever owned. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I thought you didn't want me. Marcus shook his head. I wanted you too much. Silence? Then, Eleanor whispered, you should have told me. I was afraid. Of me. No. His thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. Of what loving you would cost me. She stepped closer. And what did it cost you? Marcus looked into her eyes. My pride. A small smile touched her lips. I can live with that. He smiled. For a moment, neither moved. Then, Marcus lifted his hand to her cheek. He waited, giving her every chance to step away. She didn't. Instead, Eleanor whispered. Marcus, he leaned closer. Their foreheads touched. Tell me to stop. She shook her head. Don't. His hand moved gently to the back of her neck. Then he kissed her, softly, carefully. Almost uncertainly. It was nothing like the passionate kisses Eleanor had imagined from stories. It was better, because it felt like a promise. A promise made not by their families, not by their titles, not by a dead woman, but by the two of them. Eleanor's fingers tightened around his coat. Marcus pulled away just enough to look at her. Neither spoke. Then Eleanor smiled. You know. What? You took your time. Marcus laughed softly. I was trying to be respectful. You've been respectful for weeks. I was terrified of kissing me, of wanting to. Her smile faded into something softer. She reached up and touched his cheek. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Marcus looked at her. Are you sure? Eleanor nodded. Yes. He kissed her again. This time, she met him halfway. And when they finally separated, Eleanor rested her forehead against his chest. For the first time, there was no distance between them. No arrangement, no obligation. No secret separating husband from wife. Only Marcus and Eleanor, together. But then, a loud crash came from the hallway. They both turned. Marcus immediately reached for his pistol. Eleanor stepped behind him. The library door slowly opened. No one stood outside. Only an envelope lay on the floor. Marcus picked it up. His face changed when he saw the seal. Eleanor noticed. What is it? Marcus opened the letter. His eyes moved across the page. Then he looked at her. It's from your father. Eleanor's smile disappeared. What does he say? Marcus handed her the letter. There were only 2 lines. Eleanor read them aloud. Your mother did not die naturally. She looked up. Marcus's expression was grim, and beneath it, Eleanor's voice broke. It says, the Duke knows who killed her. The truth about Eleanor's mother was finally uncovered. It had taken months. Months of searching through old letters. Months of tracing hidden payments. Months of following the trail. that had begun with a promise made 7 years earlier. And when the truth finally came out, it was not Eleanor's mother who had betrayed anyone. It was Lord Ashcombe, her own father. He had helped Marcus's father hide money through the estate. When Eleanor's mother discovered the truth, she threatened to expose them. That was why she had been silenced. Not by illness, not by accident, but by a secret powerful men had spent years protecting. And the man who had ordered it had already been dead. Her father had known. Marcus had known pieces of it. And for years, he had carried the guilt of failing to protect the woman who had trusted him. But now the truth was finally in Eleanor's hands. Her mother had not abandoned her. She had loved her. She had protected her until the very end. And the promise she had made to Marcus had never been about money. It had been about Eleanor. Protect her. Keep her safe. Make sure she never believes the lies they told her. Marcus had kept that promise. But somewhere along the way, the promise had become love. A year after the wedding, Blackthorne Hall looked different. The dark curtains were gone. The empty corridors were filled with flowers. Children from the nearby village played in the gardens. The servants laughed more freely, and the once silent house had finally become a home. Eleanor stood on the terrace one spring morning, watching the gardens bloom. Marcus approached from behind. "You're awake early," she smiled. "So are you." "I couldn't sleep." "Why?" He stepped beside her. "I was thinking." "That sounds dangerous." Marcus laughed. "You've become very disrespectful to your husband. You married me anyway." "I did." He looked at her. "And I would do it again." Eleanor turned toward him. "Even knowing everything. Especially knowing everything." She smiled. Marcus reached for her hand. The same hand he had held in the chapel on the day they married. But now there was no uncertainty. No distance. No arrangement. Only love. "You know," Eleanor said, "there was a time when I thought I would spend my entire life being invisible." Marcus looked at her. "Do you still feel invisible?" She shook her head. "No." "Why?" She smiled. "Because someone finally saw me." Marcus lifted her hand and kissed it. "I didn't just see you." He stepped closer. "I chose you." Eleanor's eyes softened. "And I chose you too." Later that afternoon, the entire estate gathered for dinner. The children ran through the gardens. The servants filled the tables. Music played beneath the open windows. Marcus sat beside Eleanor, not across from her, beside her, as he always did now. A young girl from the village approached Eleanor shyly. "Your Grace." Eleanor smiled. "Yes. Is it true you used to live here?" Eleanor laughed softly. "No." The girl looked confused. "You mean before you became a duchess?" Eleanor glanced at Marcus. He smiled. "Yes." The girl thought for a moment. "Were you happy then?" Eleanor paused. She could have said no. She could have remembered every cruel word, every humiliation, every time her family made her feel worthless. Instead, she smiled. "I was waiting. For what?" Eleanor looked at Marcus. "For someone to remind me that I had never been worthless." The girl smiled. Marcus reached beneath the table and took Eleanor's hand. That evening, after everyone had gone, Eleanor returned to the library. The old portrait of her mother still hung above the fireplace. Beside it was a new portrait. Eleanor and Marcus. Together, not Duke and Duchess. Not a political alliance. Husband and wife. She stood before the paintings. Marcus came up behind her. "You miss her?" "Yes." "I do too." Eleanor turned. "You barely knew her. She saved my brother. She saved all of us." Marcus nodded. Then he reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small envelope. Eleanor recognized it immediately. Her mother's handwriting. "What is that?" "The last letter. You never showed me this." "I couldn't." "Why?" "Because I hadn't earned the right." Eleanor took it. She opened it carefully. Inside were only a few lines. Her mother's final words to Marcus were simple. "If Eleanor ever finds someone who loves her for who she truly is, let her go. Do not protect her from love. Protect her until she finds it." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Marcus. "You kept this all these years." "Yes." Why? He smiled. Because I finally understand what she meant. Eleanor stepped into his arms, and Marcus held her tightly. I was supposed to protect you until you found love. He kissed her forehead. I never expected to become the man you found it with. Eleanor smiled against his chest. Neither did I. Years later, people still talked about the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorne. They talked about how the feared Duke had changed, how his estate prospered, how the Duchess personally managed the household accounts, how she opened a school for village children, how no servant at Blackthorne Hall was ever again treated as worthless. But the story people loved most was much simpler. They said a duke once entered a room full of beautiful women and chose the quiet one pouring tea. They said her own family had called her worthless. They said she had believed them, until one man looked at her and saw what everyone else had missed: her intelligence, her kindness, her courage, her heart. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson Eleanor ever learned. You do not become worthy because someone powerful chooses you. You are always worthy sometimes. You simply need someone brave enough to see it. Marcus found Eleanor's hand beneath the table. She looked at him. He smiled. She smiled back. And in the house that had once been filled with secrets and silence, the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorne lived the rest of their lives together. Not because they were promised to each other, not because their families arranged it, not because fate demanded it, but because, after everything they had survived, they chose each other. Every morning, every evening, every ordinary day in between. And that was their happily ever after. Years passed, and somehow, Eleanor still remembered the girl she had once been. The girl who stood behind a tea table while her sisters were praised. The girl who had been told she was plain, too quiet, too ordinary, worthless. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and the fire burned low, she wondered what that girl would think if she could see her now. A duchess, a wife, a mother, a woman whose voice was heard throughout Blackthorne Hall. But Eleanor knew the truth. She had not changed into someone worthy. She had simply stopped believing the people who told her she wasn't. One evening, many years after her wedding, Eleanor walked through the same garden where Marcus had once found her reading alone. The roses were blooming. She stopped beside the old stone bench. Marcus was sitting there. His hair had begun to gray. There were lines around his eyes now. But when he looked at Eleanor, she still saw the same man who had once stood before an entire room and chosen her. "You're late," he said. She smiled. "You waited. I always wait." Eleanor sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. They simply watched the sunset. Then, Marcus reached for her hand. "Do you remember the first time I saw you?" Eleanor laughed softly. "I remember wishing you would look somewhere else." "Why?" "Because everyone else was already staring." Marcus shook his head. "I wasn't staring because you were different." She looked at him. "I was staring because you were the only person in that room who wasn't pretending." Eleanor smiled. "And you?" "I was pretending." She raised an eyebrow. "You?" "I was pretending I didn't care." She laughed. "You were terrible at it." "I know." They sat quietly again. Then, Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus looked at her. "Regret what?" "Choosing me." His expression immediately changed. "Never. Not even once. Not even for a second." Eleanor smiled. "I used to think being chosen was the greatest thing that could happen to a woman." Marcus squeezed her hand. And now, she looked toward the gardens. "Now, I know the greatest thing is choosing yourself." Marcus smiled. "And choosing someone who lets you." Eleanor turned toward him. "That too." He kissed her forehead, the same gentle kiss he had given her on the night she had first realized she was loved. That night, Eleanor returned to her room. On the dressing table sat an old photograph. Her mother, young, beautiful, smiling. Eleanor picked it up. "Mother," she whispered, "I finally understand." She looked toward the doorway. Marcus stood there. She smiled. "You were right." "About what?" "That love isn't supposed to make you smaller." Marcus walked toward her. "No." He took her hand. "It should make you brave enough to become yourself." Eleanor looked at him. I wish she could have seen this. Marcus nodded. So do I. She placed the photograph back on the table. Then she took his hand. Together, they walked toward the window. Outside, the gardens were quiet beneath the moonlight. The same gardens where Eleanor had once felt invisible. The same house where she had once been afraid to speak. The same woman, but no longer the same life. Marcus looked at her. You know what I remember most? What? The first time you laughed. Eleanor smiled. I remember you staring. I was falling in love. You didn't know it yet. No. He kissed her hand. But perhaps my heart did. Eleanor leaned against him. And for a moment, neither Duke nor Duchess existed. There were no titles, no secrets, no family names, no old promises. Only two people who had found each other when neither expected to. And perhaps that was why their love endured. Because Marcus had not rescued Eleanor from being worthless. He had simply been the first person brave enough to tell her the truth. She had never been worthless. She had never been too ordinary. She had never needed to become someone else to deserve love. She had been worthy from the beginning, and the man who once chose her in front of everyone spent the rest of his life choosing her again. Every morning, every evening, every ordinary moment in between. And whenever Eleanor remembered the girl who had once stood silently behind that tea table, she no longer felt sorry for her. She smiled. Because that girl had survived. That girl had learned. That girl had finally found her voice. And most importantly, that girl had found her way home. Not to a duke, not to a grand estate, but to herself. And beside her, through every chapter that followed, stood the man who had looked past everything the world said about her and loved the woman she had always been. That was Eleanor's real happily ever after. Not being chosen, but finally knowing she had always been worth choosing. If Eleanor's story touched your heart, tell us in the comments, would you have married the Duke if you were in Eleanor's place? And if you believe everyone deserves to be loved for who they truly are, not for their beauty, wealth, or family name, then subscribe to Whispers of Love. We have more unforgettable stories of love, sacrifice, secrets, and second chances waiting for you. Until the next story, remember, sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one worth choosing most.